Hello and welcome to my review of the entire Warhammer the Horus Heresy plastic range for 2022. Now what you're seeing here is pretty much every single plastic release for Warhammer the Horus Heresy in 2022. Before we get into the meat of the video, I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of you that support this channel. Every single one of you that is a member, that supports the channel through Patreon and supports in other ways such as watching the videos, making the comments, subscribing. It means a lot and I can't make these videos without you. So thank you so much for everyone that supports the channel. These videos I do in my own time. I'm not sent anything for free or early. I have 167 Horus Heresy videos in the YouTube channel's playlist. This year I have created 107 of those 167. So that is a huge amount of content to release 100 videos just about Horus Heresy in 2022. That number will increase in 2023. You've probably seen other YouTuber videos where they go through like their top picks of video games or the top picks of electronics or phones, things like this, kind of like an awards video. This sort of is, but for Horus Heresy, this has been the biggest release all year. It's a brand new game system. They've introduced Plastic Horus Heresy as one of the main three games that Games Workshop produce. None of this would be possible if you awesome people that buy Forge World resin didn't buy Forge World resin. I can tell you that right now. There's a lot of money that needs to be invested in making all of the injection molds and to release all of these kits at the price point Games Workshop have. And it's thanks to you. You guys are the heroes that bought the original Baneblades, that bought the original Spartan tanks, that even struggled with the hybrid kits such as the Storm Eagles. So that's a massive shout out to you awesome guys that have contributed to the success of the Horus Heresy. As you can see, there have been a lot of releases this year. If we just move on over to the right side, I've got a number of books there. I've got a number of miniatures. We'll go through them, not necessarily in kind of release date order, but a couple of miniatures didn't make it onto the list, such as Remus Ventanus and Argel Tal. They came out towards the end of 2021. However, a surprising miniature that I didn't really realise came out in 2022, right at the start of 2022 in January, was a Primarch. We actually received a Primarch this year in 2022, which is fantastic. Last year we had the Lion, this year we had Jagatai Khan. He's right there. He's the second most expensive Primarch. I know the top Primarch kind of shares that pedestal with another two, but this is like the second tier of expensive Primarchs. And yeah, lovely Primarch. I had great fun building him at the start of this year, and shortly after he was followed by two plastic Horus Heresy characters. This was in the form of Dominion Zephon for Blood Angels and Fafnir Ran. Okay, would have been great to have a plastic Sons of Horus character, looking back at it, but what those two releases did is they introduced us to kind of mainstream plastic Horus Heresy. We hadn't really had a plastic Horus Heresy miniature before, so these were the first two. They were reasonably priced at £18, I think, and then in April they increased them slightly to 19. But yeah, that was a great introduction to plastic Horus Heresy with those two character models. The boxes, again, if you just look at those boxes, they were absolutely stunning. Introduced us to what the future would be for Warhammer the Horus Heresy in plastic. The instructions, although black and white, they were fine, they did the job, and I guess it sort of cut costs down, them doing that instead of like the you know, satin shiny CAD instructions that we've had from, you know, Forge World resin kits. So it did the job, and it was a great introduction. Following on from that, we received the full Warhammer the Horus Heresy Age of Darkness box set in June. So less than 4 months later, we received that box set, and what an incredible box set. It had a ton of excellent miniatures. There wasn't any Legion specific miniatures in there, so you could build them and paint them up to whichever Legion you wanted. And the good news about that is you could use all of those miniatures for one Legion. So you could really start your large Horus Heresy box set. The price as well. Yes, it's £180, but I said it in many of the videos, the Spartan tank alone in resin, which is a very good kit, was topping out at about £130 on Forge World. So for £50 more, not only did you get that tank in the plastic form, but the Spartan was a lovely kit. It introduced us again to a big plastic Horus Heresy tank, and yeah, also introduced us to the Rhino, you know, the vehicle accessory sprue, which Games Workshop has honoured by including it in every single Horus Heresy vehicle. That's one of the big motivators of me buying multiple Rhinos and multiple support tanks, multiple Rhinos and multiple Predators, because I know that I'm going to get that sprue, and that sprue can be used for lots of other vehicles and 40k miniatures too. But that Spartan, really, with a lot of these kits, is about what they're bringing to the table in future kits. Some of these sprues and kits are the foundations for a much varied selection of vehicles that they can choose from. The Spartan, those sprues in there were then used in part to create the Land Raider Proteus kit. A fantastic kit that has introduced Horus Heresy players to the Land Raider Proteus Explorator, and also the Proteus itself. So now we've got a Horus Heresy Land Raider. Before, we could only have the hybrid kits from Forge World, or even some of the resin kits, but now we had a plastic Land Raider that was also the same price as the current Land Raiders in 40k, which is great because they could have priced it higher and it still would have sold, there's no doubt. Alongside the release of Age of Darkness, they took a gamble and they brought out a very big, heavy assault tank called the Kratos. I'm a big fan of tanks anyway, and I think this tank looks incredible. It was a gamble because it's a big, expensive tank, and it's a lot of points. It's questionable if it's useful in a game, in smaller games, because for the same points you could get a arguably more useful Land Raider Spartan. But they took that gamble, and I'm pleased they did create a daddy Sakaran, I guess. Speaking of Sakarans, later in the year we were also treated to the Sakaran. It's a vanilla Sakaran, but it does have those sponson options. There's like 4 different sponson options. It is a little bit of a shame that we didn't get multiple turret options just to add some variety, but I have every faith that they will, like the Land Raider and Rhino chassis, bring out newer turret options for that tank. Speaking of the Rhino, what a kit. Cheaper than the current plastic Rhino, has that vehicle accessory sprue, and was the foundation for these Predator support tanks, the Predator battle tank, even the recently released Arcus missile tank, which if you take 2 of them and keep them at the back, can cause a lot of damage to your opponent. Dreadnoughts, wow, we have been spoilt with Dreadnoughts this year. Not 1, not 2, but 3 separate Dreadnoughts for plastic Horus Heresy. Yes, it would have been nice to round that off with a plastic Deredio. I'm sure we'll get one soon, and then I can compare the resin one, which I've recently picked up, to it. But the Dreadnought that came with the Age of Darkness, I still feel to this day should have been the, I say, full kit with the extra sprue, just to give you a few more options. They had the sprue ready, it was there, but they decided to neuter that Dreadnought in the Age of Darkness set, along with, you know, providing you with 10 Cataphractii Terminators, which are 6 or 7 years old or so. So they were a couple of choices that were questionable in my eyes. But we did eventually get the Contemptor Dreadnought, the full kit. It's a very decent price point. It's still going to cost you more picking one of these up with the 2 weapon options that you would prefer, as opposed to Forge World. And this brings me on to my next topic. A lot of people found the price of Forge World resin kits as the main reason that put them off. Also heard a number of things about the material used, how difficult it was to work with, if it was dangerous, slippage issues, quality control issues, but also they didn't factor in the time it takes you to build your models. My channel is very much a building and collecting channel. I very rarely do any painting. So I'm at the forefront of knowing how long these models take, the experience needed to build them. Most people, in my opinion, prefer the painting of the hobby. And that's all right. But at some point, you're still going to need to build that miniature to get it to the painting stage. And I hope my videos throughout all of this year have explained that the plastic Horus Heresy, in most cases, is cheaper, but it will take you a longer time to build. The longer the time you've got to build, the less time you have to paint. Some of these kits are 3 to 4 times longer to build than their resin counterparts, and that's with the inclusion of all the prep for the resin pieces. In the Dreadnought's particular case, it's actually more expensive to kit out a plastic Contemptor with the weapon options you need than it was from the Forge World resin Contemptor. And reading between the lines, it's not difficult to summarise that as a reason to remove Forge World resin weapon options off of the site, because they could have kept them on there like they have done with the Leviathan Dreadnoughts. Moving on to troops and infantry, the Mark 6s are a nice kit. You've got 20 of them. When they were first announced, people obviously jumped on the bandwagon of, oh, these are Primaris size, these are much bigger than the previous Space Marines that have come before them, when in reality they are exactly the same size between Mark 3s and Mark 6s. The proportions do look great on Mark 6s, this curved armour, but they were lacking heavy weapons, and actually special weapons for that matter. And I read a number of comments regarding this, maybe from new players of Horus Heresy that were used to the 40k Space Marine sets that had a number of special weapons and, you know, potentially a number of heavy weapons. Space Marines don't work the same way in Horus Heresy. You have particular units that have the same weapon, like 5 las cannons or 5 plasma cannons, and then you have your infantry that you have the 10 or the 20 that all again have the same weapons. So bundling in a load of heavy weapons and special weapons that undoubtedly would have raised the cost of that set to £60 for 20 Space Marines would be very off-putting and unacceptable. So they decided to release special weapons and heavy weapons in their own boxes. And the boxes are good. They're giving you 10 weapons per choice. So you have that option of kitting out 10 of them with the desired weapon for the unit, which is usually the common action. But that wasn't the end of the story. Not only did they release Primaris Mark 6 Space Marines, they were relentless in bringing out Mark 6 heads and shoulder pads. They could have just released 10 heads, but no, in every pack now from Forge World you're receiving 11, so that means you can have 10 of them with helmets and still have a head spare if you don't want to use the helmetless version. Some of the helmets have been amazing. The most recent helmets that I've liked the looks of have been the Word Bearers, the Dark Angels I have there, and the Emperor's Children. Some have also been quite questionable, such as the Ultramarines, and dare I say, the Space Wolves. Mark 6s weren't the only infantry on Games Workshop's agenda to release though. They also decided, to coincide with the Horus Heresy, to re-release Mark III and Mark IV armoured Space Marines. They did that in boxes of 20. They've been hugely popular. Whenever I go to pick up some Mark IIIs or even Mark IV sometimes, I occasionally am confronted by the out of stock message. And third-party stockists have had a nightmare trying to refill their back orders. So if anything, that should give a message to Games Workshop that there is a thirst for those older miniatures from 6 or 7 years ago, and also a potential interest in future marks of Space Marine armour in the form of Mark II Crusade armour and Mark V Heresy armour. Let's hope that happens in the future. The 2 Praetors included in the set are ginormous to this day. Again, I've read many comments about the size of Praetors, and I've read those for the past couple of years. And I think one of the trigger points for opening up those conversations was, of course, the Big Daddy himself, the big Imperial Fist Praetor, in Tartarus armour, no less. And it allows us to debate further on Artificer armour and how Praetors are in charge of 1,000 Space Marines. They're pretty much a chapter master. Chapters these days in the 41st millennium are 1,000 strong, and there is one chapter master typically. Back in the Horus Heresy days, there were multiple chapter equivalents, and the guys in charge had the most bespoke armour. There is only one level higher than this bespoke Artificer armour, and that is a Primarch. So I'm not surprised that there are many differences in the armour and the sizes between all of the different Praetors. The one thing I will say about the Praetors is I do wish that they had multiple poses and multiple weapon options. They did include helmeted heads and helmetless heads, which is something. And for a time at least, the Sons of Horus, I say, Praetor, served as a good proxy before we got the awesome Death Guard Praetor. We'll talk about them in a moment. But alongside the reboxing of the Mark III and Mark IV armoured Space Marines, we also got the repackaging of the Cataphracti Terminators and the Tartarus pattern Terminators. Tartarus pattern Terminators are looking very small now. They're even smaller than the old Warhammer 40,000 Dominus pattern Terminators. And the Cataphracti pattern Terminators look small compared to some of the Praetors that have been released. I just want to talk a little bit about the Predator and the chassis that the Rhino has provided them. I think the Predator, both kits, you can't go wrong. You're getting a whopping 4 weapon options for the normal Predator tank and 5 for the support tank. They really are incredible kits. There is a little bit of controversy about the Predator battle tank having the twin las cannons, because if you look in the lore, I think it was the Space Wolves that first modified their Predators to have those. But from a rules point of view, they've always had them for the past, 10-15 years in Horus Heresy as an option for Predators. That kind of positions us neatly onto the weapons. Just want to touch upon the weapons for a moment before we talk about the Forge World character models that they've released. We have had a massive increase in the number of weapons introduced to this game system, and both the Loyalist Legiones Astartes army book and the rulebook have made these possible. They were followed up by the Forces of the Omnissiah and the Forces of the Emperor army book. I would say they were not as good as the Legiones Astartes books, which really kicked off Plastic Horus Heresy with a bang. And I'm very much a fan of both of the Astartes books. The layout is still tricky to navigate. I think the only thing they could have done to change is put all of the weapons and the special rules and things right at the back, and have the legions at the front, and go through all of the legions, somewhere in the middle start the book with the units and end with all of those rules, so that at least with the weapons you could just flip all the way to the back rather than some random page in the middle of a book. But other than that, I think the books have been solid. I would have preferred even more pictures of painted miniatures. You know, if they gave us an extra 20, 30 pages of just pictures of these miniatures on battlefields and examples, things like that, that would have been amazing. I dislike the direction that Warhammer 40,000 has gone in with the Crusade rules and giving you hardly any paint guides or hardly any pictures of the models and things, especially in the data sheets. If we just want data sheets and rules, give us free rules, you know, digitally. That's the trade-off in my head. The whole reason why you pick up the books is because you like to look at things and you like the feel of a book, and these books aren't small, they're big formats, they're heavy. If you're just interested in gaming and you're not that interested in the lore, and I'm not sure why you wouldn't be, then the digital edition of the rules for free with your models purchased on a tablet, on a phone, would encourage people to get out and game more. The more people game, the more they'll enjoy the hobby, the more they'll paint, the more they'll pay, the more they'll buy miniatures. It's a self-fulfilling chain of events. After I've talked a little bit about the books and like the books, you probably wish to hear more content about the lack of content. We will skip on over to the characters and the Praetors. I tried to pick up every single Praetor this year from Forge World for the Horus Heresy. We had the fantastic release of the Emperor's Children Praetors. Both the Terminator and the Standard Praetor are lovely miniatures, and so is Lucius. I like how you've got helmet options for all of them, and sometimes helmetless options. The Dark Angels characters were next. We finally got our resin Corswain, which I've been, you know, wanting for such a while, and we also got Marduk Cedras. Two fantastic looking miniatures, lots of details. I can see why they couldn't do those in plastic and couldn't do them justice. We then received the Death Guard Praetors, which had both helmeted and helmetless options for both of them, and that's what I'm looking for in all of these is options, really. Depending on the pose, I understand it could be difficult giving us different weapon options, but at least different head options is fantastic. Yes, they are expensive, but just touching upon Forge World this year, out of those 107 videos I released, there were a number of kits purchased this year, such as the Legion Glaive and the Arcus and the Sabre. I even picked up a new Titan earlier in the year, another Warbringer, and I have to say that the quality in all of these Forge World kits has been incredible, and you would know it if it was not. I would make a big fuss about the lack of quality and the bad quality control, missing parts, things like that. As I said at the start, I'm not giving anything for free. It's all purchased with my own money, and if I come across any issues, I'm verbal about it, because these things are not cheap. They are a luxury, they cost a lot of money, and I want to equip you guys with as much information about all of these products and miniatures as I can. And I have to say a huge thumbs up to Forge World this year, because they have done a stunning job with all of their miniatures, not only the new miniatures and the resin kits, but also the previous ones that have been remade this year and produced this year. I think they are fantastic, and they are on the ball right now, so I can't recommend them enough. I'm not sure what else they could do to warrant you investing in some of their resin miniatures. One of the downsides, though, of having plastic Horus Heresy is thought process that has been birthed through all of this, which is not the fear of missing out, but the fear of overpayment. And what I mean by that is hobbyists waiting and not buying the resin kits that they really want, and waiting in the hope that they'll come out in plastic. Some kits have. I myself have engaged in this very briefly with the Scorpius missile tank. For years I've wanted a Scorpius missile tank to do videos on and things like that, and to make videos on, but I have waited and waited, and eventually it has come out in plastic. I think we'll be getting plastic jet bikes, and if we don't, we should be. And then there's the big tanks, like the Typhon and the Cerberus. And of course now the Sicaran. But put it bluntly, there's a lot more options available now than we ever have had in Horus Heresy. So you shouldn't feel too bad if you pick up a kit in resin from Forge World and it turns out to be £30 or £40 more expensive than a plastic kit, because you should take comfort in the knowledge that that resin kit will take you 3 or 4 times less time, which you could use for building another kit or painting or so on. So I hope that helps if you were thinking about picking up a resin kit. As always, my Discord is open and you can join us there for free and ask a load of questions about certain kits, you know, the difficulty of the build, what it consists of, and measure that on your own experience of building kits and whether it is a viable kit for your hobby skill. So looking into the future and the plastic of Horus Heresy, I've already created 2 very exhaustive videos on the subject, on the plastic kits that are available now and the resin kits that could potentially come to plastic in the future. So if you haven't already, I strongly advise you to check both of those out. I'll put them in the description and pin them in the comments. Looking forward to the future of what Games Workshop and Forge World have already teased us. It seems like there is at least a plastic jet bike. We're getting a resin Horus Ascended. Whether that opens up the gateway to other Primarchs that are Ascended, such as Angron, whether the plastic Dark Mechanicus opens it up to Dark Mechanicum, which I've always been intrigued about. Whether we'll get more plastic kits for Custodes or a larger range for Sisters or even Imperium. Maybe we'll even get plastic Mechanicum models at some point. But for now, I've been extremely happy with everything that Games Workshop have released in 2022 for the Horus Heresy. It's exceeded my expectations. When I found out that Horus Heresy was coming into plastic, already owning a large resin collection, I was overjoyed, because it meant that the price that I paid for the resin kits, I could now buy multiples in plastic, and I'd be one step closer to that collection. It's questionable whether Space Marine collections are ever completed, but it certainly helps it from a collector point of view, and it helps with all of these videos, allowing me to compare the resin and plastic kits. So it's just time for me to pick out my overall best Horus Heresy miniature of this year. From a looks perspective and a project perspective, I have to give it to the Kratos heavy assault tank. It's brand new, we've never seen anything like it before. It's a larger Sicaran, but a more kind of streamlined. Game-wise, it might not be viable because it's a lot of points. It's a big unit, it has a specific purpose, but it's a lot of fun as a project, and as a kit it gives you so many different weapon options that are interchangeable. My other notable mentions are of course the Arcus tank, because that was such a fun tank to build and put together. I was able to put it together in about 3 hours, and I'm 100% sure that the hybrid kit that we had before would not have been as fun. And the other notable mentions, of course, have been the Predator tanks and the Land Raider Proteus, with the number of options that both of those kits provide you with. If I was able to look at all of the miniatures throughout the whole year and pick my favourite, it would have been the Avatar of Cain. But this is a Horus Heresy video, and I thought I'd just make my selection based on what's in front of me. What do you guys think of all of plastic Horus Heresy from 2022 and some of the resin kits? What would you have liked to have seen? What are you looking forward to over 2023? Are you looking forward to the Typhon siege tank? Are you looking forward to more plastic infantry, more options? Please do put your thoughts and comments down below as always. It'd be great to hear from you. Thank you ever so much for joining me today, Thank you for watching. The Emperor Protects.